I was already late to meet my fiance's intimidating family for the first time when I stopped to give my only umbrella to an old woman stranded in a downpour. I arrived at their grand home soaking wet and humiliated. But when I was finally introduced to the powerful family matriarch everyone was so afraid of, it was the woman from the storm. Before we get into it, I have a quick question for you. What is your favorite thing to do on a rainy day? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to subscribe for more stories every single day. Okay, let's head out into that storm. The pressure had been building for weeks. Meeting the family was an understatement. I was, according to my fiancé, William, about to be presented for inspection to a tribunal of the most intimidating women he knew: his mother, his older sister Penelope, and the true, undisputed head of their wealthy and powerful family, his grandmother, Josephine. "Just be yourself," he had told me on the phone the night before, his voice tight with an anxiety he was trying and failing to hide. But, maybe don't mention your volunteer work at the city soup kitchen. And if they ask about your parents, just say they're in education, not retired public school teachers. He sighed. "Look, my sister, Penelope, can be a lot. She's a snob. And my grandmother, Josephine, she's a legend. She doesn't suffer fools gladly. And for the love of God, Sadie," he had pleaded, "whatever you do, please, please do not be late. Punctuality is like a religion to her." I had promised I wouldn't be. I spent the entire morning in a state of nervous preparation, trying to transform myself from Sadie, the down-to-earth pediatric nurse, into a woman who looked like she belonged in their world. I chose my best, most conservative dress, a simple but elegant navy blue silk. I had my hair done professionally. I was a nervous wreck, but I was determined to pass their test for William's sake. I was taking the bus and then walking the final few blocks to their grand brownstone in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a practical choice that now, as I thought about it, probably seemed like a provincial failure in their eyes. I had left myself an entire hour of extra time. I would not be late. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. As I was walking the final half mile, the sky, which had been a clear autumn blue just moments before, turned a dark, bruised purple. The wind picked up, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. And then the heavens opened. It was not a gentle shower. It was a sudden, violent, and torrential downpour. I quickly opened my small, trusty umbrella, the only thing standing between my perfectly coiffed hair and a complete disaster. It was through the curtain of rain that I saw her. She was an elderly woman, dressed in a simple but elegant tweed coat, and she was completely stranded. She was huddled under the uselessly small awning of a closed flower shop, a picture of quiet, dignified misery as the rain hammered down around her, soaking her clothes and her paper shopping bags. Taxis, their lights on, were speeding past her on the wet street, ignoring her outstretched hand. My mind screamed at me, "Keep walking. You can't be late. This is not your problem." I thought of William's panicked voice. I thought of his intimidating grandmother. But then I looked at the old woman's face, at her look of wearied resignation, and my own grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "You can always tell the true measure of a person by how they treat a stranger in the rain." With a sigh of resignation at my own character, I changed course. I walked over to the woman, angling my small umbrella to cover both of us as best I could. "This is horrible, isn't it?" I said with a warm smile. She looked up at me, her eyes a sharp and intelligent gray, wide with surprise. "It certainly is," she said, her voice a crisp, cultured tone. "I seem to have misjudged the forecast." "Let me help you get a taxi," I insisted. They never stop for a single person in a storm like this. For the next 10 minutes, we stood on the curb together, a small two-person island in the middle of the deluge. I held the umbrella while she held her shopping bags. My left side, the side exposed to the driving rain, was quickly becoming completely and totally soaked. We finally managed to flag down a taxi. I helped her with her bags, and then
On impulse, I did something I knew I would regret. "Here," I said, pushing my umbrella into her hands as she sat in the back of the cab. "You take this. You need it more than I do." "Oh, my dear, I couldn't possibly," she protested. "Nonsense," I said, smiling. "Consider it a gift. Have a wonderful day." I closed the taxi door and watched it pull away, my one and only shield from the storm now gone. I spent the next 15 minutes running through the driving rain, my hair a ruined mess, my silk dress now a heavy, soaked, and clinging second skin, my makeup surely running down my face. When I finally arrived, breathless and dripping, on the doorstep of the Grand Prescott family brownstone, I was a certifiable disaster. I looked at my watch. I was 17 minutes late. I took one last, deep, shuddering breath, braced myself for the coming storm, and rang the bell. The door was opened by a woman in her late 30s, a woman so perfectly dressed, so impeccably made up that she looked like she had just stepped out of the pages of a fashion magazine. It was Penelope. Her polite, welcoming smile froze on her face the moment she saw me. Her eyes did a slow, horrified sweep of my appearance, from my dripping hair down my soaked dress to the puddle that was now forming at my feet on her pristine marble floor. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask if I was all right. She just looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated, and deeply satisfied contempt. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet, icy disdain, "look what the storm dragged in." Penelope's cruel words, "look what the storm dragged in," hung in the heavy, humid air of the grand foyer. I stood there, dripping a puddle onto the pristine black and white marble floor, a specimen of drowned middle-class mediocrity presented for her inspection. The humiliation was a hot flush that spread across my cold, wet skin. For a moment, I was paralyzed, my mind a blank slate of shock and shame. It was my fiancé, William, who broke the spell. He rushed past his sister, his own face a mask of horrified disbelief and a fierce, protective anger. "Penelope, that's enough," he snapped, his voice a low, furious growl I had rarely heard from him. He immediately came to my side, wrapping his arm around my shivering shoulders, ignoring the fact that he was soaking his own expensive-looking cashmere sweater in the process. "Sadie, honey, what on earth happened to you? You're soaked to the bone." Before I could even begin to explain the storm, the old woman, the taxi, the umbrella, his mother and father, who had clearly been waiting in the wings, emerged from the grand living room. They took in the scene, me dripping and disheveled, their daughter looking smug and triumphant, and their son looking furious, with the cool, appraising gazes of seasoned social strategists. "You can't stay in those clothes," William said, his voice firm as he ignored his parents and sister. "You'll catch your death." He turned to his mother. "Mom, do you have a robe or something Sadie can wear?" His mother, a woman who radiated a chilly, intimidating elegance, just looked at my ruined dress with a look of profound distaste. "I'm not sure any of my things would fit her, dear," she said, her voice a silken, condescending drawl. "Perhaps one of the maid's uniforms?" The insult was so breathtaking, so utterly devoid of basic human warmth, that even Penelope had the decency to look slightly shocked. "No," William said, his voice now as cold as ice. "That won't be necessary." He turned to me. "Come on," he said, and he led me, his arm a protective shield, up the grand, sweeping staircase, away from their cold, judgmental stares. He took me to his old childhood bedroom, a place of surprising warmth and character in the otherwise sterile mansion. It was filled with books and old sports trophies. He immediately went to his closet and pulled out a soft, thick, gray sweatshirt and a pair of comfortable-looking sweatpants. "Here," he said, his eyes full of a deep, apologetic sorrow. "They're not elegant, but they're warm and dry. I am so, so sorry, Sadie, for all of this. For them." As I changed in the adjoining bathroom, my hands shaking as I peeled off my cold, ruined dress, I finally told him the whole story. I told him about the sudden downpour and about the kind-faced old woman who was getting soaked. I told him about helping her into a cab and about giving her my umbrella. He listened, and his anger at his family seemed to soften, replaced by a look of profound and deeply moving pride. "That was a wonderful thing to do, Sadie," he said, when I emerged, now drowning in his warm, comfortable clothes. "A truly wonderful thing." He sighed. "But you know my family. They're not going to understand the mud on your dress part. To them, the appearance of kindness is always more important than the act of it." He was right. When we came back downstairs, I felt like I was facing a firing squad. I was clean and dry, but in William's oversized, comfortable clothes, I was an even greater symbol of everything they disdained. I was not just a drowned rat, I was now a slovenly, disrespectful intruder who had dared to wear her boyfriend's lounging clothes to a formal family gathering. They were all in the living room, a grand, intimidating space with ceilings so high they made you feel small. And for the next hour, I endured their polite but ruthless interrogation. Penelope, the snob, asked me about my small rented apartment. Her father, the businessman, asked me about my financial prospects. And her mother, the socialite, gave me a long, pitying lecture on the importance of maintaining appearances. It was a performance of quiet, sustained cruelty, designed to remind me at every turn that I did not belong. I just sat there, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I didn't want, and I endured it, my silent sacrifice. I did it for William. I weathered the storm of their disapproval, my own anger and humiliation a tight, hard knot in my stomach, because I loved their son. Finally, just as I thought I couldn't take another second of it, a tall, stern-faced butler entered the room. "Dinner is served," he announced, his voice a deep, sonorous bell. "Madame Josephina is waiting for you in the dining room." The name hung in the air. Josephina. The matriarch. The legendary, formidable grandmother I had heard so much about. The final and most important judge.
The family stood up. William gave my hand a nervous, supportive squeeze. I took a deep, shuddering breath and followed them out of the living room and down the long, silent hallway toward the dining room, a fraud in my boyfriend's borrowed clothes, my heart pounding a slow, heavy, and terrified rhythm. I had already been tried and convicted by the sister and the parents. Now it was time to face the final executioner. I had no idea that my trial was already over and that the verdict had been decided an hour ago by a complete stranger in the back of a taxi in the middle of a storm. William squeezed my hand, a small, desperate gesture of support in the face of what we both believed was my impending doom. His sister, Penelope, and his mother walked ahead of us, their postures rigid with a smug, triumphant satisfaction. They had won. They had successfully proven to everyone, and most importantly to the head of their family, that their son had chosen an unsuitable partner. The butler, Henderson, stood before a pair of towering dark wood doors. He pulled them open with a silent, formal grace, revealing the grand dining room beyond. The room was breathtaking. It was a cavern of old-world elegance, with dark wood-paneled walls, a magnificent crystal chandelier that cast a warm golden light over everything, and a single, impossibly long mahogany table set for dinner with a terrifying military precision. And at the far end of that table, in a large, throne-like chair at its head, sat a single, solitary figure. It was a woman, an old woman, her silver hair pulled back in a simple, elegant bun. She was reading a book, a pair of small glasses perched on the end of her nose. As we entered, she looked up, her eyes, a sharp and intelligent gray, scanning our small procession. My mind was a screaming chaos of anxiety. This is it, I thought. Just be polite. Don't speak unless spoken to. Try not to look like you're wearing your boyfriend's laundry. But then, as my own eyes adjusted to the warm, dim light of the room, my frantic internal monologue came to a sudden, screeching halt. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It was her. It was the woman from the storm. The hair was no longer wet and plastered to her head, but was now a soft silver cloud. The simple tweed coat, soaked and dripping, was gone, replaced by a simple but incredibly elegant silk blouse the color of cream. But the face, that kind, intelligent, and deeply wrinkled face, and those sharp, piercing gray eyes, they were the same. It was, without a single solitary doubt, the woman to whom I had given my umbrella. The woman I had left in the back of a taxi an hour ago. The family matriarch, Josephine. She looked at me, and a slow, warm, and deeply knowing smile spread across her face. Penelope, my tormentor, still blissfully unaware, stepped forward to perform the introductions, her voice full of a formal, dismissive politeness. "Grandmother," she said, "I'd like you to finally meet William's, insert disdain here, friend. This is Sadie." Josephine's smile never wavered. She ignored her granddaughter completely. Her eyes, full of a warm, conspiratorial amusement, were fixed only on me. "My dear," she began, her voice a clear, strong, and authoritative instrument that instantly commanded the room. "I trust you had no further trouble with the storm after you so kindly and so foolishly gave me your umbrella?" The question, so simple, so direct, dropped into the center of the room like a lit stick of dynamite. The effect on my fiancé's family was immediate and catastrophic. I watched as Penelope's smug, confident expression did not just fade, but seemed to shatter. Her jaw going slack, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. I saw her mother, the woman who had suggested I wear one of the maid's uniforms, go completely and totally pale, her hand flying to her throat, as if she were suddenly choking. I saw William, my sweet, terrified William, stare at me, his own eyes wide with a new, dawning and utterly glorious awe. They all stared at me, then at their grandmother, then back at me, the impossible, disastrous pieces of their own social execution finally, horribly, slamming into place in their minds. The drowned rat on their doorstep, the tardy, unimpressive guest, the girl in the borrowed sweatshirt. She was the one their sainted, all-powerful matriarch had just publicly and gratefully acknowledged as a savior. I finally found my voice, a small but steady thing. "No, ma'am," I said, a slow, relieved smile of my own beginning to form. "I made it here just fine, thank you." Josephine then looked down the long table, her gaze finally falling upon her own granddaughter's horrified face. Her own smile vanished, replaced by a look of cool, regal disapproval. "Penelope," she said, her voice now as cold as the rain I had just run through, "the seating arrangement is incorrect." I don't understand, grandmother," Penelope stammered. "This young lady," Josephine said, her voice leaving no room for argument as she pointed a single, elegant finger at me, "is a guest of honor in my home tonight. She will not be sitting at the far end of the table like a disobedient child." She then looked at the butler, who was watching the entire scene with an impassive, professional calm. "Henderson," she commanded, "you will set a place for Miss Peters, right here, next to me." As the butler moved with a silent efficiency to do her bidding, I walked the length of that long, silent table, the eyes of my fiancé's family following my every step, as he pulled out the chair for me at the head of the table, directly opposite my horrified and speechless sister-in-law-to-be. I finally understood.
The test wasn't about my dress or my job or my punctuality. The real test had happened an hour ago, in a downpour, with a complete stranger, and the woman who held all the power in this family had just announced to everyone, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had passed. A command from the matriarch was not a suggestion. It was a gravitational pull that reordered the entire solar system of the family. The butler, Henderson, moved with a silent, unflappable efficiency. He picked up my simple place setting from the far end of the table and, in a move of profound symbolic significance, he swapped it with my future sister-in-law, Penelope's ornate one. Penelope was forced to watch, her face a mask of thunderous, impotent fury, as she was demoted, and I was elevated. I walked the long length of the dining room, my every step feeling both terrifying and triumphant, and took my new seat at the right hand of Josephine Prescott. The dinner that followed was the most surreal, the most satisfying, and the most masterfully executed act of social warfare I had ever witnessed.
The food was served, a series of exquisite, perfectly cooked dishes. But no one, save for my fiancé William and me, seemed to have much of an appetite. The air in the room was thick with a tension so profound you could have cut it with a butter knife. My in-laws-to-be, who had been the confident, cruel arbiters of my fate just a half hour before, were now silent, miserable prisoners at their own dining table. Josephine, the matriarch, was a brilliant conductor of this silent, awkward symphony. She ignored her own family completely, as if they were merely decorative and slightly disappointing pieces of furniture. Her entire, formidable attention was focused, with a warm and genuine interest, on me. "So, Sadie," she began, after taking a delicate sip of her wine, "William tells me you are a pediatric nurse. That must be incredibly challenging work. Tell me about it." And so I did. I spoke of my work, of the children I cared for, of the small, heartbreaking tragedies and the profound, beautiful victories that made up my daily life. I spoke with a passion and an honesty that I had been afraid to show them before. And she listened. She listened with an intelligent, focused intensity, asking sharp, insightful questions that showed she was not just being polite, she was genuinely interested in my life, in my mind, in who I was as a person. At one point, my future mother-in-law, in a desperate attempt to regain some conversational footing, tried to interject. "Speaking of children," she said, her voice a little too bright, "Penelope was just named the head of the Junior League's charity committee for the Children's Hospital." Josephine cut her off, not with a harsh word, but with a look so cold, so dismissive that it silenced her instantly. "That's lovely, dear," she said, before turning her warm gaze back to me. "But I was just about to ask Sadie about her time volunteering in Haiti after the earthquake. That sounds far more interesting, don't you think?" And so it went. For 2 hours, I was the guest of honor. My humble life, the life they had deemed so simple and so unworthy, was now the celebrated centerpiece of their grand family dinner. And with every question Josephine asked me, with every story she prompted me to tell, she was holding up a mirror to her own family's shallow, superficial values. She was showing them, without ever saying it directly, that my life of service and compassion had a substance and a value that their life of country clubs and committee meetings could never hope to match. The final, beautiful blow came with dessert. Josephine turned to me, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous, conspiratorial light. "You know, my dear," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire table to hear, "it is so rare to meet a young person today who understands that your character is infinitely more valuable than your comfort. You got soaked in a storm. You ruined a perfectly good dress. You were late for an important engagement, all for a complete stranger. Some," she said, her gaze flickering for a split second to her own granddaughter Penelope, "might call that foolish." She then smiled at me. "I call it
admirable. You are a woman of substance, Sadie, a rare and precious thing." She then reached down beside her chair and picked up a small, elegant purse. She pulled out a small, antique blue velvet box. It looked ancient, a priceless family heirloom. "This," she began, her voice now a low, serious tone, "belonged to my own mother, William's great-grandmother. It was given to me on my wedding day, and I made a promise that I would one day give it to a woman who was truly worthy of joining the Prescott family, a woman who embodied the strength and the kindness that this family was supposed to be built on."
She pushed the small velvet box across the polished table until it came to rest directly in front of me. "I believe," she said, her eyes shining, "that I have finally, after all these years, found her." I stared at the small, priceless-looking box on the table. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a crown. It was a scepter. It was a symbol of my absolute and total acceptance into the heart of this family. And as I looked up into the horrified, jealous, and utterly defeated face of my future sister-in-law, Penelope, I knew that the battle, the war I had been so terrified of fighting, was already over. I had just won. I stared at the small, blue velvet box as if it were a live thing. It sat on the polished mahogany table, a silent, powerful testament to the absolute and seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. The air in the grand dining room was thick with the unspoken, choking jealousy of my future sister-in-law, Penelope, and the stunned, horrified silence of her parents. My fiancé William just looked from the box to me, his face a picture of pure, unadulterated pride and joy. "Ma'am, Josephine," I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't possibly. This is a family heirloom. It's too much." The matriarch, Josephine, just smiled her slow, knowing smile. "Nonsense, child," she said, her voice full of a warm, final authority. "It is not a gift to be accepted or refused. It is a mantle, a symbol. It belonged to my mother, a woman who came to this country with nothing but a good heart and a strong will. She would want it to be worn by a woman of similar character." She then glanced with a look as sharp and as cold as a shard of ice at her own granddaughter. "And as it seems, you are the only one at this table who fits that description, the matter is settled." With a hand that was not entirely steady, I reached out and opened the box. Nestled on a bed of faded, cream-colored satin was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a necklace, an intricate, antique piece of silver and sapphires, the stones a deep, brilliant blue that seemed to hold all the secrets of the sea. It was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a piece of history. The rest of the dinner was a quiet, surreal affair. The power dynamic in the room had been permanently and irrevocably altered. I was no longer the quiet, unimpressive guest to be tolerated. I was the chosen one, the matriarch's anointed successor, and William's parents and sister were forced to sit there and watch as Josephine and I chatted and laughed like old friends, their own previous cruelty now a thick, indigestible sauce on their expensive meal. Our departure, an hour later, was a masterpiece of quiet social triumph. As we stood in the grand foyer, Josephine embraced me warmly. "You are a good woman, Sadie," she whispered in my ear. "Don't ever let these foolish children of mine make you feel otherwise. You are always welcome in this home." William's parents, now humbled and clearly terrified of the matriarch's wrath, offered me stiff, awkward apologies. "We are so very sorry for the misunderstanding earlier, Sadie," his mother, Isabel, stammered.
unable to meet my eye. I just nodded graciously. I did not need their apology. I had something far more valuable: their grandmother's respect. On the car ride home, a comfortable, happy silence filled the car for a long time. I was still wearing William's oversized, warm sweatshirt. I looked down at the priceless, antique velvet box that now sat in my lap. The contrast was almost comical.
William finally broke the silence. He reached over and took my hand. I have never, he said, shaking his head in a kind of wondrous awe, in my entire life, seen anyone, and I mean anyone, put my sister and my mother in their place like that. And you didn't even have to fight. You were just you. He looked at me then, at my messy hair and my borrowed, comfortable clothes, and the look in his eyes was one of such profound, unconditional love that it took my breath away. "You look beautiful," he said. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Our wedding, 3 months later, was a beautiful, joyful affair. It was not at the country club. It was at a lovely old botanical garden, a place that felt like us. William's parents were there, their behavior impeccably, almost fearfully, polite. Penelope was there, chastened and quiet, and the guest of honor, sitting in the front row, beaming with a pride that seemed to light up the entire room, was Josephine. And as I walked down the aisle to marry the man I loved, I was wearing my beautiful wedding dress, and around my neck, resting against my skin, were the cool, heavy, and magnificent sapphires of the Prescott family necklace. I thought back to that terrible, rainy day, to the moment I had stood on their doorstep, soaked and shivering, feeling so small and so worthless. I had been so terrified of failing their test, of not being good enough for their world. I had had no idea that my greatest failure, my tardiness, my ruined dress, my simple act of compassion for a stranger, was in fact my greatest victory. My vindication wasn't in seeing my in-laws humiliated. It was in this profound, beautiful, and hard-won peace. It was the realization that I didn't need to fit into their world, because I had found a man and a grandmother who were more than happy to fit into mine. I had learned that true family doesn't judge you for the mud on your dress. They love you for the kindness in your heart. An absolutely wonderful and satisfying story about how true character is revealed in the smallest moments. What a powerful way for the matriarch to find the truth. This is the ultimate test of character story. What do you think of Josephine's method for judging her family's new addition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were cheering for Sadie, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of karma and vindication. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.